Alright guys, today we're going to work on 10-4, which is solving quadratic equations by using the quadratic formula. Now, the hardest part about this lesson is memorizing the quadratic formula, which is x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. That is going to be the most challenging part to this. Once you memorize that formula, you should know that the rest of it is pretty easy. Using it is going to be really easy. So let's go ahead and get started with this problem we have written down here, which is x squared minus 2x minus 24. Now, from what we've learned so far, we know of 4 different ways that we can solve for the roots of this problem. We can solve it by factoring, we can solve it by graphing it, we can solve it by completing the square, which we learned in the last lesson, and we're going to solve it by using the quadratic formula this time. Let's just talk a little about why you don't want to use the other ones and why we're learning the quadratic formula. First of all, let's talk about graphing. Graphing is a time-consuming effort. It's going to take you a while to draw the graph, to make sure everything goes, and in the long run, it's really not worth the time. We can also factor it out, and for this problem, factoring out is probably the easiest way to go, but we don't know that from the beginning, so the problem with factoring is it doesn't work for all the problems. For this one it would, but there's no way of knowing that until you're done factoring. So you can try factoring every single problem, but some problems you're going to end up figuring out that you can factor, and then you have to start all over anyway, so they end up being a waste of time as well. The third method is by completing the square, which you learned about in the last lesson. However, when you complete the square, it gives you an answer that isn't exactly accurate. For example, the answer to this, I'll tell you right now, is negative 4 and 6. I worked this problem out earlier by completing the square, and I rounded to nearest tenth, and I got 5.9 and negative 3.9. Which is 0.1 away from my answer. However, it didn't give me the correct answer that I was looking for. It was not accurate. You can use it and you can round, I guess, to the nearest whole number, but it's not the most accurate way of doing it. So now we're going to use the quadratic formula. So remember that in the quadratic equation, an equation written this way, x right here is a, this is b, and this is c. So a is 1, b is negative 2, and c is negative 24. All we have to do is make sure we plug them into the quadratic equation, so let's go ahead and get started. X equals negative b, which is actually negative 2, so we know that's going to be a positive, plus or minus the square root of b, which is once again negative 2 squared, minus 4a, which since there's nothing before the x, a is 1, and c, which is negative 24. So that's going to be over 2 and a, which is once again 1. So let's go ahead and solve this. X equals negative 1 essentially times negative 2 is going to be 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared is 4. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4, and negative 4 times negative 24 is going to give you 96. So a positive 96. And that's going to be over 2 times 1, which is 2. So we have x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 100, which we know is 10, over 2. So this is what we end up getting. So from here, we know that the square root of 100 is 10. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this right here. And I'm going to go ahead and put 10, since I know it is 10. Now, I know what you're thinking, you should divide these two, but as of right now, let's not do that. This is as far as we can go with this problem. The reason is because of this plus and this minus. So we actually have to break off into 2 different problems here. One we're going to use the positive, and one we're going to use the negative. So let's start off with the positive. It's written the same way, except we're just using the positive. So 2 plus 10 over 2. And then over here we have x equals 2 minus, because we're using the minus, so it's plus or minus on this side, 10 over 2. So now we know from this problem right here that 2 plus 10 is 12, and 2 goes into 12 6 times. So our first answer is x equals 6. And over here we have 2 minus 10, which we know is negative 8, and 2 goes into negative 8, negative 4 times. So for our second answer, we have x is negative 4. And these are your two answers. Those are your two roots for this problem. So even though it looks like a long drawn out process, it should be pretty easy to use it. The hardest part is just memorizing the quadratic formula. Okay guys, here's another problem that's very similar to the last problem we did. This is 24x squared minus 14x equals 6. The difference here is I know ahead of time that this one you cannot factor out. So if you're trying to factor out, you're going to waste your time. So might as well just stick to the quadratic formula and do it this way. It may seem longer, but trust me guys, the more you memorize it, the more you use it, the better you'll get at it, and it'll be end up being a lot faster for you guys. So here we go. The first thing you notice is that this 6 is just hanging out over here. So we gotta subtract it because it has to be equal to 0. Subtract it from both sides. We end up getting 24x squared minus 14x minus 6 equals 0. And that's the form we wanted in. So now we're just going to go ahead and write in the quadratic equation. So I'm going to go ahead and write it up here. X equals negative b is negative 14. Plus or minus the square root of b, which is negative 14 again, squared, minus 4. A is 24. And c is negative 6. Over 2, and a is 24. Alright, so now that I plugged all this in, I'm going to go ahead and solve it. X equals negative 1 times negative 14 is positive 14, plus or minus the square root of negative 14 squared is 196, and negative 4 times 24 times negative 6 is going to be positive 576. So this is a pretty big problem. 2 times 24 is 48. Alright, so let's simplify this a little more. X equals 14 plus or minus square root of 772, which is 196 plus 576 over 48. So now once again, remember there's nothing we can do here. And unlike the last problem, you'll see that there's no perfect square for 772. So you want to leave it like it is. Last time we did know the square of 100, which was 10. But here we don't know what the square of 772 is. So we're going to just leave it like it is. We're going to go ahead and split them with them just like the way it is. So here we have x equals 14. We're going to use the addition over here. The square root of 772 over 48, and over here we have x equals 14 minus the square root of 772 over 48. So once you get to this point, you are going to have to use your calculator to solve the rest of this. Because we don't know what the square root of 772 is, it's the best thing that we use our calculator. So we're going to go ahead and do this one first on the left, the addition one. So we're going to go ahead and punch in 14 plus 772, the square root of that. And we're going to divide that by 48. And you see the number we have here is 0.8705. So we're going to go ahead and round that to nearest tenth. So the first answer is going to end up being x equals 0.9. The next one we're going to do, we're going to use the calculator again for this one, is we're going to go ahead and do the negative one. So we're going to do 14 minus 772, the square root of that, And then we're going to divide it once again by 48. And as you can see now, we have negative 0.2871, which we're going to go ahead and round to the nearest tenth again. So we're going to have x equals negative 0.3. One other thing about this, now that I see this here, is that you shouldn't really put equals because they are not equal. Because we rounded, because we estimated, instead of putting equals, we're going to go ahead and put the about sign because that is, they're about equal to that. They're not exactly equal, so we're not going to put that in there. And this is your answer. Alright guys, the last thing we're going to work on today is using the discriminant to find your roots. So, discriminant is this equation, is part of the quadratic formula. It's the equation that's in the radical sign. So as you can see from the quadratic formula here above, what's in the radical sign is b squared minus 4ac. This is called the discriminant. And depending on what the discriminant equals tells us how many roots we have. Remember earlier last lesson we learned that there are 3 different possibilities when it comes to roots. We can have 2 roots, which means the parabola crosses the x-axis at the left and the right point of it. We can have 1 root, which means that the parabola doesn't cross the x-axis, but its apex is at the x-axis. And we can have 0 roots, which means that the parabola does not even cross the x-axis at all. So if whatever we have in the discriminant somehow equals a negative number, let's say when we add all this up it equals negative 5, that's going to mean, because it's a negative number, that it has zero roots, which means that it is not crossing the x-axis. If our square root is equal to 0, then that means we're going to have 1 root, which means the apex is touching the x-axis, and that is the only thing that is. If my equation inside the radical sign ends up being a positive number, any number, such as, let's say, 10, then that means that we have 2 roots, which is usually that the left and the right side both of the parabola both cross the x-axis. So this is the last part of your homework that you're going to see. It's going to ask you to find the discriminant, and then it's going to want you to tell how many. 2x squared plus 10x plus 11 equals 0. So remember, we're only doing the discriminant, which is square root of b squared minus 4ac, because it only wants us to find that. So here we go. The square root, first of all, b is 10, so 10 squared minus 4a is 2, so we're going to put 2 in parentheses right here, and c is 11. So 10 squared, as we know, is 100. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8, times 11 is negative 88. So what we have here is 12. So 12, square root of 12 is our answer. And since the number is positive, then we know that we have 2 roots. And that's it. That's all it wants us to know, is what the discriminant is and how many roots we have. So that's it, guys. Good luck.